She said it right in front of everyone. 12 people sitting around my dining room table, the table my late husband built with his own 2 hands from reclaimed oak, and my daughter-in-law looked at me, standing in the doorway of my own kitchen, and said, "Nobody asked you to be here, Faye." Not Mom. Not even my name said with any warmth, just flat, cold, like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I turned around, walked back into the kitchen and stood over the sink for a long time, staring at the window above it, the one that looks out over the backyard, where Ray's rose garden still comes back every spring, even though he's been gone for 4 years now. I stared at those roses, and I made a decision. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, because if I just tell you what happened that night, you won't understand how we got there. My husband Ray passed in the spring of 2021, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning, I held his hand. We had 41 years together. Met when I was 26, working the front desk at a physical therapy clinic in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He walked in with a torn rotator cuff and a smile that didn't quit. We were married 7 months later. People said we were moving too fast. We said we were moving exactly right. We built a good life. Ray had a landscaping business that he grew from 1 truck and a push mower into something real. 12 employees, contracts with 3 commercial properties in the county, a reputation he was proud of. I went back to school in my 30s, got my nursing license, worked 22 years at the same hospital before I retired. We paid off our house in 2009, a 4-bedroom colonial on almost 2 acres outside Knoxville, Tennessee. Not flashy, but ours. When Ray died, I thought I understood grief. I had lost both my parents, a brother. But losing Ray was different. The house felt like a museum. Every room had a memory with a sharp edge. Our son Philip came down from Cincinnati for the funeral and stayed 2 weeks. He was good during that time. He was my boy again, checking the gutters, sitting with me on the porch, not trying to fill the silence with words that didn't fit. Philip was 42 then. He had been with his wife Amber for 6 years, married for 4. I had tried with Amber. I genuinely had. She was pretty in the way that seems deliberate, always put together, always aware of the impression she was making. She called me Faye from the first day she met me, which, fine, I told her that was what I preferred. But there was something behind her eyes when she looked at my house, at my things, at my life, that I couldn't name then. I can name it now. It was calculation. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati. Philip had been working in logistics management for the same company for 8 years. But around 18 months after Ray passed, he called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could hear it in his voice before he said a word. "Mom," he said, "things have gotten complicated at work." Complicated turned out to mean that his company had restructured, his position had been eliminated, and he had been out of work for 6 weeks without telling me. 6 weeks. I found that out later. The night he called, he only told me about the last 2. "We're doing fine," he said, the way people say it when they're not. "I just wanted you to know." Amber got on the phone after. That should have been my first sign. Amber never got on the phone with me voluntarily. "Faye," she said, warm in a way that had a temperature to it, if you know what I mean. "We've been talking, and we were wondering, and please, if you say no, we completely understand. Would you ever consider letting us stay with you, just while Philip gets back on his feet? 3 months, maybe 4. We'd help with the house. You shouldn't be rattling around in all that space alone anyway. I want you to understand something about where I was in that moment. I was 64 years old, 14 months into widowhood, and I was rattling around in that house. She wasn't wrong about that. I had 4 bedrooms and I slept in one and kept the door closed on the rest. And Philip was my son, my only child. I told myself I wanted to help. I told myself Ray would have done the same. Of course, I said, come home. They drove down 3 weeks later. A moving van, 2 cars, and a storage unit's worth of things I had not been told about. I had prepared the guest suite, the large bedroom and bath at the end of the hall. I had put fresh flowers on the dresser. I had made up the bed with the good linens. The first thing Amber said when she walked through the front door was, "Oh, this layout is so different than I remembered." She said it like a problem to be solved. The second thing she said was, "Where do you want us to put the sectional?" They had brought a sectional sofa, a large grey sectional that did not fit with anything in my living room, where Ray and I had a matching set of cream-coloured sofas we bought together at an estate sale in 2014. Amber stood in the middle of my living room with her hands on her hips, looking at my furniture the way you look at something you're planning to move. "We can just use what I have," I said. "Oh, we will eventually," she said, "but the sectional is so much more comfortable. We spend a lot of time in the living room." I told myself it was temporary, 3 months, maybe 4. I put my sofas in the basement. I want to be clear that I am not a passive woman by nature. I raised Philip largely on my own while Ray built the business. Early years were lean, and Ray worked 6 days a week. I worked double shifts at the hospital, more times than I can count. I am not someone who folds easily, but there is something that happens when it is your child involved. Some switch that grief and love conspire to flip. You want to make it work. You want to be the bigger person. You tell yourself you are choosing generosity. By week 3, Amber had rearranged the kitchen. I came downstairs one morning and could not find my colander. She had reorganized the cabinets to make more sense, she explained, like my kitchen had been waiting 30 years for her to arrive and correct it. My colander was now in the cabinet above the refrigerator, which I can barely reach. I said nothing. By week 6, she had replaced the bathroom hand towels in the main hall bath. Mine were sage green, the ones I'd had for years, perfectly good, with white ones with little monogrammed A's on them. I said nothing. Week 8 was the first time money came up directly. Philip was still job hunting. He had some severance, but it was running thin. "Just until I get something lined up," he said. I started putting an extra $400 into the joint account I set up so they could access grocery money. I kept a notebook about it in my nightstand drawer, not because I planned to hold it over him, but because Ray always said, "Put it in writing. Just habit." The notebook filled up faster than I expected. Month 3 was when I lost my bedroom. I had the master suite, our bedroom, Ray's and mine. The room where he passed, the room with the bay window that looks out of the roses. I kept his reading glasses on the nightstand. I kept his cardigan on the hook behind the door, not because I couldn't move them. Because I wasn't ready. Amber knocked on my door one evening, very polite, very measured. She sat on the edge of the chair in my room, and she said, "Faye, I want to talk about something sensitive, and I hope you know I'm coming from a place of love." I knew then whatever followed was not coming from a place of love. "This room," she said, "it's the largest in the house, and Philip and I, we've been talking, we feel like we've kind of taken over the guest suite, and with us being here longer than we originally planned." "How much longer?" I asked. She smiled. "It didn't reach anywhere. That's the other thing we wanted to discuss. Things are complicated. Philip's leads haven't panned out yet. We think We think it might be another 6 months. I sat with that. 6 months on top of the 3 we were already past. We were wondering, she continued, whether you'd be comfortable in the guest suite. You'd have your own full bath, and you'd honestly probably find it cozier, less upkeep. Less upkeep in my own bedroom, in the room where my husband died. I moved into the guest suite the following weekend. I need you to understand what I am telling you. I moved out of my own bedroom. I carried Ray's cardigan and his reading glasses down the hall, and I put them in a drawer in the guest suite where I couldn't see them without opening the drawer. And I told myself I was being gracious. I told myself it was temporary. 3 months became 6. 6 became 9. The notebook in my nightstand held $14,300 worth of groceries, utility overages, a car repair for Amber's Kia, 2 months' worth of Philip's health insurance premium when Cobra ran out, and a $600 vet bill for their dog Chester, who had managed to eat through part of the baseboard in the hallway and whom Amber blamed on the dry air in Tennessee. By month 10, Amber had started hosting. She invited her college friends to stay for a long weekend. I came home from my book club on a Friday evening to find 3 women I'd never met sitting in my living room, on her sectional, watching a show on my television, and Amber in my kitchen making a charcuterie board on my marble pastry board that Ray bought me in France in 2003, on the only international trip we ever took together. I asked quietly, when Amber walked past me in the hallway, if it might have been nice to give me some notice. She said, I thought you'd enjoy having the company. That was month 10. Month 11 was when she took down the photographs. I had photographs along the staircase wall. Ray and me at Philip's college graduation. Ray and me on our anniversary trip to Asheville. One of Ray teaching Philip to fly fish in the Smokies. A family portrait from Christmas 2018, the last Christmas before Ray got sick. Amber replaced them. She said she was refreshing the gallery wall. She used a phrase like that, gallery wall, as if my home were an apartment she had rented on Airbnb. She replaced them with prints she ordered online, neutral-toned, botanical, very tasteful, very impersonal, very not mine. She put my photographs in a cardboard box in the garage. I found the box 3 days later when I went to get my gardening gloves. It was just sitting there on top of the recycling bin. My life with Ray, in a cardboard box, open to the garage air. I carried the box inside. I put it in my closet. I did not say anything. But I opened my notebook that night and I wrote, "Enough is enough. Figure out what comes next." The dinner was in February. Philip had gotten a job, a good one actually, regional operations manager for a distribution company based in Nashville, and I had believed this meant they would start looking for their own place. I had assumed it. I had never said it out loud, and that was my mistake. Amber decided to throw a dinner party to celebrate. In my house, she invited 11 people, friends of hers and Philip's from Knoxville and Nashville, and she planned, cooked, decorated, and arranged everything without asking me a single question. I offered to help with the food. She said she had it handled. I offered to make my deviled eggs, which have been a fixture at every family gathering since 1987. She said, "We're going more of a Mediterranean direction." I set the table because it was my table. She rearranged it after I left the room. When the guests arrived, she welcomed them at the door. She introduced herself. She introduced Philip. She did not introduce me. I came out of the kitchen carrying a pitcher of water, and she said from across the room, in a tone that was somehow both cheerful and dismissive, "Oh, Faye's been helping out in the kitchen." Helping out. In my kitchen. In my house. I set the pitcher down and took my seat at the table. That's when she said it. She came over, not quietly, not privately. And she looked at the chair I was sitting in, at the head of the table. Ray's chair, the chair I had sat in for every holiday dinner for 40 years, and she said, "Actually, Faye, I was going to put Gerald there. Gerald was some colleague of Philip's I had met once at a cookout. Would you mind sitting somewhere else?" I looked at her. I looked at my son, who was looking at his shoes. I started to stand, and then Gerald, bless him, because he looked mortified, said, "Oh no, please, I don't need the head seat at all." And Amber said, louder now, so the room could hear, "She can sit in the kitchen if there isn't room." Nobody invited her to the table anyway. The room went quiet, not a theatrical quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when something crosses a line so obvious that even strangers feel it. I stood up. I looked at my son one more time. He still didn't meet my eyes. I said, calmly, "And I want you to know how much that cost me. Enjoy your evening." I got my coat, my purse, and my car keys. I drove to my friend Lenora's house 4 miles away. I sat at her kitchen table and I drank 2 cups of chamomile tea, and I told her everything. Not just that night. Everything. All 11 months of it. Lenora looked at me when I finished and said, "Faye, honey, what are you waiting for?" I went home at 10 o'clock. The dinner was still going. I could hear them through the front door, laughing, music. I went to the guest suite, which had been my bedroom for 8 months, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I opened my notebook. $14,300 in direct financial support, plus 11 months of free rent on a property that comparable houses in my neighborhood rented for $2,800 a month. That was another $30,800, the mathematics of my own generosity laid out in green ink. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Patricia Holloway. She's been handling my affairs since Ray died, and she did not seem surprised by anything I told her. She said, "Let's start with a formal notice to vacate." 30 days' notice, delivered by hand on a Thursday morning while Amber was still in her robe at my kitchen table drinking coffee she had made in my coffee maker. She read the letter. She looked up at me. For the first time in 11 months, she seemed genuinely unsure of what to say. "You can't do this," she said. "This is my home," I said. "My name is on the deed, the mortgage is paid, and the property taxes are current. I absolutely can." She called Philip at work. I could hear her from the hallway, voice low and urgent. Philip came home at lunch. He stood in the kitchen with that look on his face he used to get as a teenager when he knew he was wrong, but hadn't decided yet to admit it. "Mum," he said, "can we just talk about this?" "We should have talked about it 8 months ago," I said. 30 days, Philip. I'm not changing my mind." They pushed back. Amber contacted a tenants' rights attorney. I found this out from Philip, who told me in a moment of what I think was genuine shame. But Tennessee law was clear. They had no lease, no financial contribution to the property. 30 days was legal. 60 days was what my attorney recommended, to be safe and to keep things from escalating unnecessarily. I gave them 60. On the 58th day, they signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Nashville, near Philip's new office. I know because Philip told me. He called that evening, without Amber, I noticed, and he said, "We found a place." There was a long pause. "Mum, I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something a long time ago. I know that." I had been waiting for those words for a year. I had imagined I might cry when I heard them. I didn't. "I know you are," I said. After they left, I spent a Saturday moving through the house. I brought my sofas up from the basement. I called Lenora and 2 other girlfriends, Barbara and June's daughter Tina, who has a truck, and we moved that grey sectional to the curb. Someone came and took it within 2 hours. I rehung my photographs on the staircase wall. Ray and me at Philip's graduation, the anniversary trip to Asheville, the Christmas portrait. I stood at the foot of the stairs looking at them for a long time. Then I went into the master bedroom. I made up the bed with my own linens. I put Ray's reading glasses back on the nightstand. I hung his cardigan back on the hook behind the door. I opened the bay window so the room could breathe. The roses were just starting to come up in the back, February roses, stubborn and early, the way Ray always was. I sat on the edge of the bed and I said out loud to nobody and to him, "I'm home." I had a follow-up conversation with Patricia Holloway in March. She reviewed the notebook, every entry, every dollar, and she advised me that I had a legitimate claim for back compensation under Tennessee law, specifically around unjust enrichment, given the length of stay and the documented financial support without any formal agreement. She was careful with her language. She said, "You have options, not you will win." I appreciated that. I filed a claim for $34,400, the direct financial support plus 6 months' worth of fair market rent, which was a conservative estimate. I did not file for the full 11 months. Patricia thought that demonstrated good faith, and I agreed. Amber hired that tenant's rights attorney in earnest. There were letters. There were 2 months of negotiation that, I will be honest with you, were exhausting and unpleasant, and cost me more than money. We settled in May, $41,000, more than I asked for because their attorney had apparently advised them that going to court carried real risk. I did not celebrate when Patricia called to tell me. I just sat in Ray's chair at the kitchen table and felt something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite satisfaction, but was somewhere between the two, like putting down something heavy that you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten your arms were tired. Philip and I have been working on things, slowly. He called on my birthday in June. He came down alone in July. Amber stayed in Nashville, and we sat on the porch and talked for 3 hours. It was not easy. Some of it was painful in ways I wasn't expecting. He told me things about those 11 months that I hadn't known, about the pressure Amber put on him, about conversations he should have pushed back on and didn't. He did not make excuses. He made explanations, which is different, and I tried to hear them that way. I don't know yet what my relationship with Amber will look like. That is still being determined. What I know is that my son is still my son, and that some things are worth the long work of repair. What I also know, what I will tell any woman who is in the position I was in, watching the water rise and telling yourself it isn't that bad yet, is this: the kindness you extend to your children is real and good, and worth nothing if it costs you your own home, your own self, your own place in your own life. I should have said something when she moved my colander. I know that now. I knew it then, if I'm being honest. But I know it bone deep now, in the way you only learn things that cost you something. My name is on the deed. Ray built that table by hand. Those roses come back every spring. That is my house, and I am never leaving it again. I think about the colander a lot. That sounds small, I know. Out of everything, the bedroom, the photographs in the garage, the dinner table, the colander is what comes back to me. Because that was the moment, that was the first clear signal, and I chose to call it nothing. What I've learned, and what cost me 11 months and more than I want to count to learn, is that the way things begin is almost always the way they end up. Amber moved my colander on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my robe. She didn't ask. She didn't mention it. She just decided that her idea of order mattered more than my 30 years of knowing where things belonged in my own kitchen. And I said nothing. That silence wasn't kindness. It was the first brick I handed her to build a wall inside my own house. I don't say that to be hard on myself, because I understand now why I did it. I loved my son. I was lonely in a way that grief makes you, not just sad, but hollowed out, desperate to fill the house with something living again. And when you love someone that much, you can talk yourself into almost anything. You call it patience, you call it being the bigger person, you call it family. But there is a version of generosity that isn't generosity at all. It's avoidance dressed up in a good reason. What I had to develop, slowly and not without pain, was the understanding that genuine goodness towards someone does not mean absorbing whatever they hand you without a word. Real moral character, the kind that actually holds up, requires honesty as much as it requires warmth. I was warm. I was not honest, not with Amber, not with Philip, and not with myself about what was happening in my own home. The notebook saved me. Not because of the dollar amounts, though those mattered in the end. It saved me because it was the one place I was telling the truth. Every entry was a moment I had witnessed clearly and written down clearly, even when I was pretending out loud that everything was fine. Ray taught me that, put it in writing. He was a practical man. He understood that clarity is a form of respect, including self-respect. When Patricia Holloway sat across from me and reviewed that notebook, she didn't look surprised. She looked like a woman who had seen this before, and I realized that what I had lived through wasn't some unique failure of mine. It was a pattern, and the pattern only ends when someone decides it ends. That decision required something I had been slow to call on, not just the will to act, but the clarity to see the situation for what it was, and the backbone to follow through, even when my son was standing in my kitchen with that look on his face. Philip and I are still finding our way back. That part is real and ongoing and not racked up neatly. But I believe people can reckon with what they've done if you give them the room to do it honestly, and if you don't collapse the room by absorbing everything indefinitely. My name is on the deed. The roses come back every spring. And I finally came back too.